After witnessing Ulquiorra vs Ichigo, which I felt was peak Bleach, I thought there surely couldn't be anything to surpass that masterpiece of a fight and storyline. However, I was wrong. The second half of Fake Karakura Town is a genuine 10 out of 10 arc for me, and it contained by far the most hype moments of the show. Everything I wanted in this arc came to fruition, and it exceeded every expectation I had. I can truly say the conclusion of this arc is a masterpiece, and I have never before binged a sequence of chapters and episodes as fervently as I did for these. If you're new to this series, we cover Bleach from a completely blind perspective of never having read the manga or seen the anime. Since starting Bleach, it's quickly drawn me in from its darker themes, amazing designs, and complex characters, and I'm beyond thankful to share this brilliant story with you all. From true godlike villainy within Aizen, betrayal, hopelessness, in the darkest moments we've seen from Ichigo, this is my blind review of the last half of Fake Karakura Town. This arc was genuinely perfect to me, and I don't use that lightly. Despite having to be at work at 8 AM, I stayed up each and every night until the wee hours of the morning because I simply couldn't get enough of the story. The climax of this arc wasn't just built up in an ideal manner, it was executed with such visceral emotion, making me genuinely in awe of Kubo. The progression of Bleach through Fake Karakura Town went from lower-ranked Fracciones, Espada descending in number, followed by eventually Aizen's two Soul Reaper allies, and lastly Aizen himself, which solidified him as one of the most intense villains in modern storytelling. This sequential increase in the stakes of the fights leads to so much anticipation surrounding our protagonist eventually reaching Aizen. And as a storytelling element, it was highly effective in adding anticipation towards Aizen finally displaying just how powerful he is. Where we left off in the last video was the arrival of the Visored, with years of pent-up rage towards Aizen, and they aid in turning the tides of this grand battle back in favor of our favorite Soul Reapers. At least, they do so momentarily. What's pretty notable with their arrival is that none of the Visored had any interest minus Lisa and Shinji in saying anything to their former fellow members of the 13 guard squads. Lisa goes to kick Captain Shunsui while he plays dead on the ground, and Shinji speaks with Yamamoto, prompting the discussion of whether they're allies or foes. Shinji informs them they aren't allies, their ally instead is Ichigo, but they are against Aizen, thus making them share a common enemy. I imagine the Visored's distaste towards the Godier 13 stems from the sentencing they were given based on undergoing holification, and the fact that the Godier 13 didn't care for all these years whether they've been alive or dead. Despite what differences they may hold, together now they fight under a common purpose, to defeat Aizen and save their world. Hiyori and Lisa join Hitsugaya, Love and Rojiro team up to fight Coyote, and Hachi joins Soifon against Baraggan, while Shinji goes towards Aizen, but he's stopped by Gin. Another final matchup that has a ton of build-up was Komamura and Shuhei vs Tosen. This fight had a ton of emotions at play and was thematically brilliant. The best friend of Tosen and Tosen's own subordinate, now combining arms to defeat the men they looked up to and viewed as family. Of these fights, Hiyori and Hitsugaya vs Halle Bell was by far the most comical. Both Hitsugaya and Hiyori share such similar personalities, which leads to argumentation, and even Hiyori calling Toshiro a pervert. I really enjoyed their dynamic and the parallels they have with each other, especially with Hiyori now being my favorite Visored. It made this fight all the more enjoyable. Hachi arriving to help Soifon was a reunion that I expected to be warmer. After all, Hachi is like the nicest individual within the story, but Soifon had obvious distaste towards him, going so far as to say she doesn't know him. However, despite her attitude, she does work together with Hachi, only under the circumstance of Hachi promising to trap Urahara in a barrier for 30 days after the conclusion of the war, which is a quite humorous request. She clearly still harbors dislike towards Urahara, even over 100 years later. However, the plan they devised doesn't work, and even under the barriers of Hachi and the Bankai of Soifon, Baraggan survives and continues to pose a giant threat to everyone in the vicinity. Throughout the fight, Baraggan continually emphasizes he's the king of Hueco Mundo, that his power is the only thing absolute in this world. From his introduction and throughout the story, he continually reinforced the idea of his arrogance and king-like demeanor. In fact, he literally sits on a throne design-wise, and I always found this odd given that he's under Aizen's rule. Even while at the table with Halle Bell, Stark, and himself, when Aizen would instruct them, he would look away without any aura of subservience. It all began to make sense during his defeat that was due to Hachi masterfully taking advantage of the great absolute power Baraggan toted. Hachi implanted his own decaying hand within Baraggan, thus causing him to begin to age rapidly and be destroyed from the inside out. During these moments, we're brought to a flashback showing Baraggan as the literal king of Hueco Mundo. In fact, he wasn't lying at all, and he was sitting on a throne, however, without a castle. He He was ruling over the Hollows and he conquered all foes before him. There was no equal to the king. At least that was the case until the arrival of Aizen. And with Aizen's arrival to Wako Mundo, Aizen poses the question if Baraggan ever thought of ascending to more, and that he could grant Baraggan this power. To an individual who's ruled as king, this idea was ridiculous, and Baraggan attacks Aizen only to have his crown cut in half, symbolizing his dethronement and now servitude under Aizen. In exchange for him joining the Espada, Baraggan would gain far more power, but he always vowed to reclaim his throne, that once more he'd become the king of Wako Mundo. In his dying moments, he tried to fulfill this vow and he attempted to strike Aizen, but it was too late as he disintegrated due to his own power. Aizen, unsurprised, showed no remorse, and at this moment I began to realize that despite Aizen having many subservient to him, not all loved Aizen. He ruled not by diplomacy, but instead unrivaled power. This was the first act of disloyalty towards Aizen, and it foreshadowed more betrayal to come within his ranks. A unique element of Baraggan's release form was that he was almost identical to his appearance in the past of being the king of Wako Mundo, being the only Espada who retains their true initial form and whose release is in a hybrid of their humanoid self along with their hollow state. Baraggan, despite his increase in strength and form, he stays true to his nature of a hollow, likely viewing that form of himself as the true embodiment of power and kingship. Baraggan was truly a top-tier designed character by Kubo, whose Arrancar appearance was perfect for who and what he was, with everything about him exemplifying his timeless age, his regality, and it all makes for his aspect of death within senescence to be genuinely perfect for him as a character. After Baraggan's defeat, Stark said he wasn't one for vengeance, but he'll avenge Baraggan. I found Stark to be such a compelling character, and it's truly a disservice he never had his own volume cover or super lengthy backstory. I know we see his past, but I wish it could have extended at least an episode, but perhaps my bias weighs in very heavily. During this fight with Love and Rojiro, Stark continually displays his lack of interest in battle, and he doesn't want any more further bloodshed. He's a character burdened by his duties that clearly contrast his desires. He doesn't have evil within him, and I found him to be the most human of the Espada, and he grieves for his fallen comrade within Baraggan. Continually, he needs Lilynet to remind him of what he needs to do, that he's the #1 Espada for a reason, that the reason he must pick up his blade and fight is so no more comrades die. Within war, blood must be spilled to protect those you fight for, and Stark does just this. Stark, who believes he's at a disadvantage, once more he's fighting by himself versus two people, he's reminded by Lilynet that he's not alone. The reason he's been able to get this far is because they've been together, that he hasn't been alone since that day long ago. The dynamic of Lilynet and Stark is something I cherish throughout the story. Lilynet and Stark's relationship when first presented was far more comical and lighthearted, with them getting frustrated at each other, but in these moments where she reminds him that they're together, that he won't ever have to be alone again, these poignant scenes and dialogue show just how connected they are and how deep their bonds run. With this reminder, Stark and Lilynet unleash their ability in which Stark splits apart pieces of his soul and creates something called Los Lobos, which are wolves that serve as weapons for them, and they defeat Love and Rojiro with them. When he uses this ability, he says, "Let's go Stark," which is a really cool tidbit showing that his ability isn't a Sero, rather is just himself, his soul. After defeating Love and Rojiro, all of a sudden he's stabbed through the chest by Shunsui. Shunsui's Sanpakto ability is absurd. It makes anyone in its presence abide by the children's game, and the two games we see being whoever has the higher ground wins, and whoever steps on the other shadow wins. The ability to fight through shadows gave me Shikamaru vibes, and is truly a brilliant designed ability by Kubo. It doesn't seem like one that'd be easy to master, but clearly Shunsui uses it masterfully. While they battle, I began to feel dread for Lilynet and Stark. Stark mentions for Lilynet to not overdo it. After all, they're fighting with their own soul, not just simply a Sero. The stakes are very high. They devise a plan, and while enacting the plan, Stark uses two spirit energy swords, which is by far some of the best looking fighting styles we've seen, and the two swords versus two swords mirrored Shunsui perfectly. Despite their plan, it doesn't work, and Lilynet, while protecting Stark, disappears, and at this moment I knew the end was near for Stark. In the final moments of the fight, in which Shunsui uses a color game to defeat Stark, Stark laments having to fight someone so strong. That Stark had always envied the weak because they wouldn't be burdened by having the responsibilities that the strong possess. That the weak can flock together, they have unison and they're not alone. Stark, whose aspect of death being isolation, fits this perfectly. Within his short backstory, we're shown a mound of hollows who died due to Stark's pure spirit energy. Stark being so powerful subjugated him to loneliness and solitude with no equal near him. This endless loneliness and isolation led to Stark splitting his soul and bringing to life Lilynet to ensure he'd never be by himself again. What's really unique is that Stark is the only hollow who in their backstory has a humanoid form before ever encountering Aizen. His strength from the start was unrivaled, and eventually upon meeting Aizen, Aizen was the first individual to stand before him and not die, and thus he recruits Stark to join him as comrades, something Stark always sought. Friends, allies, those to be around him so he wouldn't be by himself. However, Stark in his death dies alone. With Lilynet gone and no one around him, he regrets his inability to repay Aizen for giving him comrades, for helping take away his isolation. The irony of him dying alone is fitting for his aspect of death. I truly wish Stark could have been more fleshed out. He's one of the most compelling and relatable Espada members, and I would have loved to see a drawn-out backstory for him. Within the paneling of his defeat within Shunsui's expression, it's evident that he wasn't happy in defeating him. Rather, they would have been friends in other circumstances. This plays perfectly into the speech that within war, both sides are evil. Regardless of how it begins, if another picks up a sword and slays another, both parties are evil. Within war, there is no right or wrong. This is true within the real world as well. There is no true black or white. It's all a mix of gray. And I don't think Stark was even scratching the surface of his true potential due to his lazy personality. The emphasis of the concept of unrivaled strength creating loneliness and isolation foreshadows the own isolation within Aizen. When someone stands at the top, there is no equal, and it's brilliant that Kubo introduces these concepts within these fights that come full circle later on. Shunsui surprisingly in this fight doesn't unleash his Bankai, and my god, I can't wait to see just how powerful it is. I imagine it could be something game related, but I could be completely wrong with that assumption. The last Espada member to be taken down is Halle Bell, and to my genuine surprise, her defeat didn't follow the same defeat her predecessors did, which made this scene all the more surprising. Aizen stabs Halle Bell, he decides she's too weak and no longer of any purpose to him. What Aizen values is strength, and if they don't offer him that, they're useless. This betrayal was all the more poignant as Halle Bell has an episode-long backstory showing how she and her Fractiones came to be, along with her introduction to Aizen and her undying loyalty towards him. In her defeat, her aspect of death is contrary to what actually happened. Her comrade's sacrifices meant nothing, her sacrifice meant nothing. This allegiance she swore, the lives she's lost, the efforts, all of them were meaningless to Aizen. Aizen doesn't care for his Espada, they're pawns, but I never expected Aizen to target his own chess pieces. But he establishes that the time for him to act is finally upon us, and something we've waited for since his initial betrayal was revealed. Once Aizen began to fight, I genuinely couldn't stop reading and watching. I haven't been this enveloped into a villain and fight scene since many years ago watching Naruto fight Pain. I'm so compelled by stories that have fantastic villains who, while watching the fight, it makes you truly question if the protagonists and heroes will win. And at times I found myself rooting for Aizen due to my sheer love of him as a character. He is the embodiment of power and unrivaled superiority, without fear. What we're about to discuss is truly the peak of Bleach and without a doubt my favorite part of the story. With the Vizored once more before Aizen, there's a poignant moment signifying the joint feelings of anger towards Aizen. Hiyori tells Aizen that living each day as a Soul Reaper, death is everywhere around them. The constant of death enables all of them to cherish every day because they understand the temporal nature of life. But Aizen took them away from the life they loved. He robbed them of what they loved and made her hurt her friends. She's harbored hatred for him all these years, and now before Aizen and his taunts, she's unable to quell her rage, and she lashes out, charging Aizen by herself, only to be stabbed by Gin. I felt such an ominous vibe seeing Hiyori fallen, and now Shinji in despair screaming for Ichigo to arrive. However, Ichigo doesn't arrive instantaneously. Rather, within Wako Mundo, he arrives to find Yami fighting versus his friends. Thankfully, Ichigo doesn't have to fight Yami long, as Byakuya and Kenpachi join forces begrudgingly to fight against Yami as he powers up more and more with the more angry he gets. Yami really embodies the berserker character trope, which is perfectly fitting for him, and he has a really drawn-out fight where both Byakuya and Kenpachi don't seem to take it overly serious, and it eventually concludes mostly off-screen. Kenpachi vs Yami was a matchup I long expected due to their similar nature, and it was great to see Kenpachi and Byakuya, both not team players, being forced to work together to defeat a common enemy. An important dialogue takes place with Ichigo and Byakuya. Byakuya tells Ichigo he needs to leave Yami to them and go to Karakura Town. It is his duty as the substitute Soul Reaper. I'd be lying if I said I didn't get chills after hearing Byakuya say these words. A character once full of pride and arrogance reminds Ichigo of his duty, and he places full trust within Ichigo. Not just him, but Mayuri also trusts Ichigo, saying that after everything concludes, he'll be conducting experiments on Ichigo and the Espada, implying he believes Ichigo will win. Both individuals who stood in opposition to our Ryoka now believe in our hero as the only way to win, and the growth amongst these characters is brilliant. Ichigo surprised me with his observation that Mayuri must have been under Urahara in the research and development squad, and he reminds Mayuri of his former counterpart, which of course makes Mayuri angry. Our protagonist then ventures through the Garganta with Unohana, who heals Ichigo while they run to the human world. Notably, Ichigo's robe while he's in his Bankai state is reflective of his power. With his robe ripped, it implies his spirit energy is not at full strength. Initially, upon observing Ichigo's spirit energy, Unohana recounted that they had the same amount, thus implying Ichigo at full strength has much more than Unohana, which is a scary thing to say the least. Ichigo, while not at full strength and still without full control of his spirit energy, is the same level as a captain, and all captains are monsters. Particularly within Unohana, she can be particularly scary while commanding Ichigo, and she gets such a serious tone, and I'd hate to see her eventually get angry. She informs Ichigo the trump card is Ichigo himself. He hasn't seen Aizen's Shikai, and instructs Ichigo to never look at it, thereby never being under the perfect hypnosis of Aizen's Sugetsu. While Ichigo travels through the Garganta, Shuhei and Komamura fight against Tosen. This fight was super symbolic with a particular focus on sight. We see Tosen's backstory in that he sought vengeance against a society that wouldn't convict a man who killed the woman he deeply cared for. While they fight, Tosen holifies and refuses to be receptive to the words of his former comrades. He sought power, he sought revenge, and now he can act upon it. The man they thought he was, the friend who they thought had a sense of justice, deceived them all. He scoffs at the power of Soul Reapers, of Bankais, and now instead abuses his newfound power. Shuhei notably states he aims to open up Tosen's eyes, a theme that takes place throughout this entire fight. With Tosen's release date, he becomes a fly-like creature, and anatomically flies have compound eyes, thus resulting in incredible vision, which perfectly fits this theme within Tosen. He can now see. Blinded his entire life, he can now see everything with his eyes, yet now with his newfound sight, he's blind to his justice, to the path he chose. Shuhei, whose mantra involves fear, is told by Tosen, the very man who taught him this mantra, that fear is the central driving force of all creatures, that they need fear to evolve. Tosen feared assimilating as a Soul Reaper and eventually dying. With the conclusion of the fight taking place, Shuhei lands a decisive blow on him, informing him that the captain he knew, the captain he loved, would have never been hit by this type of attack. His newfound sight blinded him. With his vision of vengeance, of immense power, he had lost true sight of what he stood for. Justice. Symbolically, the contrast of Tosen gaining vision and in turn becoming blind was paramount and beautifully written. The nature of the heart is touched on once more with Komamura's final moments within Tosen. That Tosen doesn't need to forgive him, but just instead did not lose himself to vengeance. That if he were to lose Tosen, he'd lose part of his heart. From Shiba to Ulquiorra to now Komamura, this theme of the heart being formed between those around you is a theme that Kubo continually pushes, and spoiler alert, it's not the only time this happens this arc. With what seemed like a moment where Tosen would be redeemed, Aizen kills him in cold blood as he no longer serves a purpose to Aizen. Once more, Aizen disposes of his pawns and clears the board once he deems him as a liability. The speech by Aizen describing this very lack of trust and loyalty towards his comrades is perfectly fitting for this moment. He says he never asked any of his comrades to trust him, rather to just follow him. That creatures use trust to survive by putting their faith in something superior. And this passing of faith and trust is cyclical, continually putting trust in an entity greater than their own, thereby passing on the responsibility to another. This very cycle creates kings and subsequently gods. That Aizen would show Shinji the very power of a god. Shinji and Aizen finally clash swords, and we see Shinji's Shikai, the inverted world. After seeing this, it makes his introduction into the story all the more intense, as we first see him upside down. I always wondered why this was the case, but now it's finally answered all these chapters and episodes later. With this ability, everything is inverted, and at first it works against Aizen, but this parlor trick, as Aizen describes, is nothing in the face of his ultimate power. I can't emphasize this enough. Aizen is such a ridiculously powerful character and compelling villain. This is further exemplified with Ichigo arriving to attack Aizen, and everything Ichigo does is null. Aizen dodges every attack and demonstrates countless times that he could kill Ichigo at any moment. They're not equals. Thankfully, in a brilliant scene, all the remaining captains and Visored stand together with Ichigo and remind Ichigo that he isn't alone, that this fight isn't just his, they're fighting to survive. I loved this scene, but it was soon after crushed by Aizen alone. With all captains fighting Aizen, things seemed to be going their way, however, it wasn't the case for long. On a side note, a power system thing I found unique was that when Soifon used her Shikai, it was simply overpowered due to Aizen having more spirit energy, which I was unaware of that being within the nature of the power system, that one's ability can simply be overpowered due to one's sheer spirit energy, but I guess it makes sense. With all the captains combining their forces, it seemed like Aizen had been overwhelmed and beaten with their joint effort. We were completely jebaited by this, however. The individual they thought was Aizen that Hitsugaya stabbed was in fact Momo. Aizen's use of his ability fooled all of the captains in the Visored to use a joint effort to make Hitsugaya stab the very person he sought to protect, the woman he cherishes. Aizen has a very Aizen-esque statement in response to him previously mentioning he wouldn't use his Sugetsu, and they ask him when he used it. He instead responds with the question of when wasn't I using my Sugetsu. His Shikai is absolute hacks, and it makes him such a scary opponent, even if you know how his ability works. Gin emphasizes this very point in my favorite quote about Aizen, that his ability isn't what makes his subordinates submit to and follow him, that despite the Espada all having differing and contrasting personalities, they were able to work together under him for one reason alone. Aizen is strength itself. Even if everyone were to gather their minds together and outthink calamities, that Aizen himself would outsmart each and every one of them. Even saying this out loud furthers my fanboying of Aizen. He is unreal, powerful, and masterfully intelligent. I do wonder though why all the captains didn't use their Bankai. The only just reasoning I can think of is that their Bankai are far too destructive to use in unison. After Aizen's Shikai tactic was revealed, he wipes out all the remaining captains until Old Man Yamamoto arrives. In a quite literal blazing glory, he fights against Aizen and reveals his plan that he'd been setting up. He'd burn Aizen to a crisp and end him. During their fight, Yamamoto voluntarily takes a sword through the chest from Aizen just to ensure that it was Aizen before him and that he wouldn't be fooled by his Sugetsu. Unfortunately for Yamamoto, Aizen once more outthought each and every one of them as the intended purpose of Wonder Weiss was finally revealed. Wonder Weiss is literally a direct counter to Yamamoto's flame abilities, and despite Yamamoto beating Wonder Weiss with his bare hands, which was super badass by the way, Wonder Weiss had absorbed Yamamoto's flames and self-detonated, causing Yamamoto to jump on top of Wonder Weiss to stop the imminent destruction, and thus be defeated by his own strength, but not before sacrificing his own arm to let off a level 96 Hado. Old Man Yamamoto is the exemplification of a badass within the story despite losing. He showed the only reason he lost is because of this one stipulation, and that there's a reason he's been the leader of the Gotei for thousands of years, it's because he's the strongest. Yamamoto fully signifies the cultural respect and admiration for the elderly within Japan, and I'm all here for godlike old men within anime. With the captains all defeated, all that's left is Ichigo versus Aizen, and once more, it isn't close. Aizen toys with Ichigo's mind, informing him that every event up until now had been set in motion by Aizen himself, and this once more shocked me. Aizen chose Ichigo as someone to help grow due to Ichigo being both human and something else. The something else evidently being Shinigami as Isshin is one himself. It all begun to make sense once more. All these events weren't mere coincidence. The questions I had regarding how hollows appeared so fast once Ichigo met Rukia, the Menos that appeared whilst fighting Uryu, everything wasn't mere coincidence, and rather it was all methodical by Aizen. I guess we can all thank Aizen for the full events of Bleach. I'm unsure why he chose Ichigo outside of the fact of Ichigo being of mixed descent. Perhaps it was to have someone alongside him while aiming to dethrone the Soul King, but I could be way off with this speculation. Eventually, however, Isshin arrives at the battlefield, and surprisingly Ichigo doesn't have that many questions, and Isshin fights versus Aizen, and Ichigo once more matches up against Gin. Gin has been a questionable character from his initial introduction into the story. He's so clouded in mystery, and while fighting against Ichigo, we see his Bankai in action, which is the ability to extend or de-extend his sword at will at super speed and distance. Quite a powerful Bankai to say the least, because it can literally one-shot an unexpected or unprepared opponent at any point in time during the battle. During Isshin versus Aizen, we learn that the Hogyoku's true ability is the ability to materialize the hearts of those around it. Once more, Kubo brings back the heart. That Urahara wanted it to bridge the boundary between Shinigami and Hollow, thereby it did, and as a result, he misinterpreted the ability of the Hogyoku. He also explains that this is in fact how Chad and Orihime gained powers, which answers another long-lasting question I had. They sought to be powerful to protect and help their friends, and thus the Hogyoku granted it. The Hogyoku now within Aizen, it began to join with his body and become one with him, giving Aizen a power-up he sure as hell didn't need. Urahara and Yoruichi both arrived to assist in this final battle, and my god, at this point in time, Aizen has literally fought everybody. Despite battling 3-on-1 at this current point, our heroes are unable to best Aizen despite Urahara seeming to land decisive blows on Aizen. Notably within this, Aizen claims that within all Soul Society, Urahara is the only one more intelligent than him, which I found surprising for Aizen to admit due to his godlike belief in himself. Isshin during this fight also shows that he has his own Getsugo Tensha, which shocked the hell out of me because I thought that was a hollow ability that Ichigo used, but I was dead wrong it seems. I'm unsure how they possess the same ability and were only shown brief discussion of it later. While they fought against Aizen, Aizen was careless as he underwent a metamorphosis that went in stages of him melding with the Hogyoku. And due to this new power, he's essentially immortal, and so he toys with his opponents and doesn't even use his Shikai. And once more, our trio fighting versus Aizen doesn't use their Bankai for an unknown reason and they're defeated. While fighting Gin continually seems disinterested in defeating Ichigo and fighting him. Rather, he seems to be sparring with him and seeking to understand Ichigo's resolve, which he comes to the conclusion of Ichigo's resolve and belief that they'd win, now to be gone. Ichigo while fighting Gin brings up the theme of the heart once more, that every opponent he fought before he's understood them through battle even without words. He can read their heart through combat, especially with the stronger they are. Although with Gin, he has no idea what Gin is fighting for, what he sought. The foreshadowing paid off immensely later, and wow, once more, hats off to Kubo. With everyone defeated, Gin and Aizen go through the Senkaimon and into the Soul Society to reach Fake Karakura Town and construct the Okin. While in the Senkaimon, Aizen kills the cleaner who was previously deemed to be immortal, which I'm sure he'll regret much later. Can we take a second to just realize how strong the Hogyoku is? It literally manifests the will of those around them, although with some limitations, but if these things are impossible for the individual who desires something, nothing will happen, which I guess is a countermeasure in terms of its bustedness, but if it's within reason and reach of the individual, it manifests these things. This is an absolute insane concept. My favorite part of the arc now begins. With Ichigo mentally defeated, Isshin arrives from his defeat to tell Ichigo they need to stop Aizen. But Ichigo viewed it as pointless. He can sense the power of Aizen and knows he's too strong. This very nature of sensing Aizen's spirit energy is indicative that Ichigo is within reach of his own power, that he can still win. But most importantly, even if he can't, then what other choice is there? If he doesn't stand against Aizen, his family, everyone he holds dear, they'll all be lost. But there is hope. Within the precipice, time doesn't work the same. It's like a hyperbolic time chamber where time moves infinitely slower within it. In this case, Ichigo has roughly 2,000 hours, thus allowing Isshin to train Ichigo, and I use train very lightly. Isshin informs Ichigo he'll learn the final Getsugo Tensho, and once more questions arise as to how he knows this ability. In fact, Isshin says his own Zanpakuto didn't want to teach him this ability, and his Zanpakuto is named Ingetsu, which is almost identical to Zangetsu. To learn this ability, Ichigo would have to meditate upon his sword and speak directly to his Zanpakuto to learn of the ability, and while meditating he reaches the inner world of his Zangetsu. A world flooded with short buildings, his world previously full of skyscrapers and dry, it now was everything Zangetsu hated. The world was full of rain. Zangetsu laments the rain. While encountering Zangetsu, he informs Ichigo he isn't Zangetsu, rather he's Tensa Zangetsu due to Ichigo being in his Bankai state. And Tensa Zangetsu looked much younger than Old Man Zangetsu. Him as a character design-wise looked absolutely incredible, and I found the voice acting so intense for these moments. Tensa Zangetsu was angry with Ichigo. Ichigo had lost faith in himself. He lost his belief. His inner world was now flooded with despair. He stopped moving forward. Ichigo begs for the teachings of this ability, but Tensa Zangetsu refuses. He says despite Ichigo wanting to protect his friends and family, what they want to protect is entirely different. With Tensa Zangetsu pulling Ichigo's hollow form out of him, Tensa Zangetsu informs Ichigo that they'll both combine and fight Ichigo together. Ichigo faces off versus Tensa Zangetsu and still pleased to learn this final ability. He refuses to submit to the denial, and despite losing over and over again, Ichigo continually gets up. Yet while they fight, he sees Tensa Zangetsu despair for their fight. Ichigo realizes that his Zanpakuto could have just hid and not allowed Ichigo to continue trying instead of fighting back. Now Ichigo allows himself to be stabbed, yet there was no pain, which is due to the fact that Zangetsu is a reflection of himself, and this allows Tensa Zangetsu to inform him of the final Getsuga Tensho. That this final Getsuga Tensho has grave consequences. The reason Tensa Zangetsu didn't want to teach Ichigo this is because what he wants to protect is Ichigo himself. A truly emotional scene upon this realization, all Tensa Zangetsu wanted to do was protect his master, which makes what to come all the more painful. In the Soul Society, Aizen toys with the humans who just woke up, and of the humans, to my delight, we see Don Kanoji, who was a character who was part of the most funny episodes in the first arc of Bleach, who we had not seen in ages. I'm so glad Kubo decided to bring him back into the story, because he was genuinely there for such a short and fast time. Don Kanoji wasn't the only one we're surprised to see here. Rangiku also arrives, and Gin informs Aizen he'd take care of her, which set off a sequence of events that made me put pieces together almost immediately. Gin refuses to talk to her and harm her in front of Aizen, despite Aizen's statement to do so, and instead he takes her far away from battle and subdues Rangiku after she questioned why he'd betray everyone, why he would betray her. Upon returning to Aizen, he lied about killing her, which at this point I realized that Gin had his own motives that had been clouded this entire time. Gin claiming he'd take care of the humans who were awake, he grabs Aizen's sword and unleashes his Bankai on Aizen, stabbing him. He tells Aizen it took him decades to understand the limitations of his Zanpakuto and the abilities, and that being touching it, which results in the hypnosis being ineffective. Not only that, but Gin himself lied about its Bankai, that it becomes dust when it shrinks or extends, and that while inside of Aizen, Gin had a piece of his sword left in Aizen that has a poison that destroys cells from the inside out, thus being his trump card in defeating him. As Aizen's cells begin to deteriorate, he takes the Hogyoku and our godlike villain seems to be defeated. I can't emphasize how shocked I was at Gin's betrayal, which we learned was product of the fact that Aizen did experimentation by taking a fraction of Rangiku's soul when she was a young girl. And it's incredible the lengths he'd go to defeat and get revenge on Aizen. Quite a love story and something I didn't expect from him as a character. It makes it all the more tragic that he devoted his life to protecting Rangiku and getting revenge on the man who hurt her, but at the cost of his own values and living his life with the woman he loved. However, this revenge is unsuccessful, and Aizen is unable to be beaten. The Hogyoku saves him and he slashes Gin. This moment may be the first time we see Gin's eyes actually open. All this time his eyes had hidden his intent, and now for once we see Gin not as a snake, but as a human. What happened next surprised the hell out of me because we never see Ichigo finish his training, so his arrival to the battlefield had me jump off my couch at 3 in the morning in shock. Ichigo with his arrival has aged visibly, his hair longer, his body taller, and now with an outfit that differs than before. Aizen, who can't sense Ichigo's power, expresses his disappointment, suggesting fear is what drives evolution, yet Ichigo didn't evolve. Ichigo didn't meet his expectations, which mirrors what Ulquiorra once told Ichigo as well. Ichigo now is no longer flustered by the boast of Aizen. Previously when they saw each other, Ichigo was weak mentally and full of fear and uncertainty. Despite their last encounter not being long ago to Aizen, for Ichigo it's been thousands of hours. Ichigo is now with purpose. I was expecting for a close fight, but this power-up from Ichigo is unbelievable. Being able to blitz Aizen, and in such a disrespectful way, grabbing his face and throwing him to the ground like he was fodder. Aizen, whose pride is overwhelming, refuses to believe this was anything but a fluke. He now clashes blades with Ichigo, and with each swing it changes the terrain of the land. Aizen believes this is due to his own immense power, but no, it's Ichigo's. Aizen uses a level 90 Kido and attempts to destroy Ichigo, having full belief it would work, but Ichigo breaks it with his bare hands and even stops Aizen's sword with his bare hands. I've never seen a protagonist level up so much and have such a power spike. Aizen, who previously bodied every single captain, head captain, and vizored, now is thrown to the side by Ichigo's immense and overwhelming strength. Ichigo now talks with a very dark and edgy tone to Aizen, emphasizing the seriousness he now possesses, and it perfectly fits his long emo boy hair. Aizen underwent another monstrous transformation, and I swear there's been like 5 this arc, and he attacks Ichigo thinking of himself as a god. A human, hollow, and Shinigami man like Ichigo would never be able to defeat him. That once more Ichigo's increase in strength was a fluke. Ichigo decides to end things in one final attack. He shows us the final Getsuga Tensho. This appearance is by far Ichigo's best transformation. In this state within Final Getsuga Tensho Mugetsu, he becomes one with Getsuga itself, bonding and becoming one with his sword. Ichigo now with black hair and an aesthetic of what I'd imagine a real-life Soul Reaper to be, he's full of darkness and omnipotent energy. He even goes so far as to create a sword out of darkness itself, and what happened next, I was full of shock and a tinge of sadness during. Tensa Zangetsu tells Ichigo that with this attack, he'll lose all his powers, and Ichigo accepted that to protect those he cares for, he'd lose everything and voluntarily embrace this fate. Ichigo, whose character, his desire, it's always been to protect those he cares about, and he does just that, at the cost of everything. Zangetsu tells Ichigo goodbye with so much despair in his voice. They'd no longer be together, and I'm so sad to see this happen. Zangetsu has stuck by Ichigo's side, trained him, motivated him, protected him, and now they'd be gone from each other, but for good cost. With this attack, it literally turns off the boss music for Aizen, In fact, in this scene, it becomes completely quiet. No noise, no music. Within this darkness, light nor sound can exist. Ichigo ended it in one attack like he promised. Aizen was defeated, although, of course, he wasn't dead. Aizen, possessing immortality, survives and believes he can now surpass what just happened to Ichigo. But watching this, I knew it was Aizen refusing to accept the fact that he's a loser. During this, Urahara arrives, and we see his Kido finally take place, sealing off Aizen's power as the Hogyoku rejected him as his master. As Aizen goes down full of rage and inacceptance, he asks why a man like Urahara would ever submit and be ruled under the Soul King. That choosing to live under the Soul King and accept the circumstances is the mindset of a loser. That victors choose what is reality. With this, Aizen is defeated and sealed away and eventually tried by the Soul Society to be imprisoned and sealed away for thousands of years. Yet while he's being sentenced, he doesn't seem angry or upset. He still holds himself with his godlike demeanor as if his plans aren't yet foiled. My god, watching these sequence of episodes and chapters, it shook me emotionally. I didn't expect firstly for Ichigo to be so immensely powerful, nor Aizen to descend into such madness. This arc was truly magnificent. With the final Getsuga Tensho, I theorized that given Isshin said he knew this ability, I imagine that's how he lost his powers well over 20 years ago. What I was reminded of as well is Uryu's ability that was similar in nature. In exchange for his full Quincy power while fighting Mayuri, he gave up his powers and had them sealed away. Knowing Kubo, things aren't mere coincidence, so I imagine both Shinigami and Quincy both possess these type of final attacks that drain the user of all their spirit energy, their trump card. I'm truly saddened that Ichigo is departed from Zangetsu, and I have no idea how we'll get it back, but I'm optimistic. In the final episode and chapter of this arc, the conclusions seem final and complete. Hitsugaya trains, vowing to be strong enough to protect Momo, Rangiku thinks on Gin, and the consequences of Ichigo's Mugetsu take place. He'll slowly have his powers fade out, and to my dismay, his edgy boy hair went away along with it. However, Ichigo isn't upset or down about this. He protected his friends, his allies, his loved ones, at the cost of everything. He did exactly what he said he would do when he fought Grimmjow. He defeated Grimmjow, Ulquiorra, and then Aizen and rescued his friends. Ichigo, a protector, is selfless and doesn't seek grandiose status that many anime protagonists seek. Instead, he seeks to be a protector, and it makes him all the more unique and incredible of a protagonist. I'm unsure what happens next. Where does the story go from here? Will Ichigo regain his powers? Will Aizen ever be part of the story again? And who is the next looming villain of the story? I guess we'll have to find out next time. If you stuck around for this video, which is my favorite Bleach one I've ever made, please don't forget to drop a subscription if you haven't already, as these videos do take a ton of time to make. This story still has so much for me to read and discover, so rest assured, we're nowhere near close to being done. As always, be greedier.